Hi everyone and welcome to my Lightroom 4 and camera calibrated workflow. Now I'm going to show you this. I've only learnt it myself a couple of days ago, but I thought it'd be a really good thing to show you guys and see what you think of it. So basically, if you look, I'm just going to show you this file, and if there's the raw file and there's the JPEG. Now these are straight out of the camera, no editing, and as you can see the JPEG is quite a bit more punchier. It's a touch brighter and definitely more punchier, more contrast. So with that being said, we need to get our camera and we need to tell it to shoot raw plus JPEG. We need to go out now. When I've done this today, it's actually really bad light, and to be honest, I'm going to do it again in some decent light. I think it's good to do it in somewhere. I mean, it ain't that bad, to be fair, but it was really, we were both freezing and it were windy, and we just rushed it in about bloody a minute and a half to get these pictures off. Now you only really need one to do what I'm going to show you, but if you've got a few, then once you've done it you can just test it, because we've got like that's a raw, that's a JPEG, oops, that's a raw, that's a JPEG, that's a raw, that's a JPEG, that's a raw, that's a JPEG, raw, JPEG, raw, JPEG. You can see it's doing on every one of them, it's doing the exact same thing. It's just punching the contrast up a bit, sharpening it up and adding a bit of highlight detail on there. So with that being said, so set your camera to take a raw plus JPEG, and you need to as well go in your camera settings and set the picture style to neutral, so that you need it so that your camera's not, because the preview that you get on the back of your camera is a JPEG preview. So if you go and have your picture style set to, I don't know, vibrant or something like that, then what's happening is every time you see the picture on the back of the camera, it's your camera's automatically adding some vibrance to it and punching it and editing it like you do in Lightroom. So then obviously when you get home and you put your raw file on the computer, then it's going to be nowhere near. This way will give you probably a blander preview on the back of your camera, but it'll give you the same preview as you're going to get when you get home and you look at it in Lightroom. So everything's going to look calibrated. So you need to make sure you choose it. You could choose a picture style of your choice. If you went, well, no John, I shoot landscapes all the time and I always like to add a bit more vibrance and a bit more contrast, you could do it. You could set yourself a custom picture style and do it that way, and then when you come back and you look at your JPEG, obviously that's the JPEG. If I'd have done a punchier JPEG with more vibrance and more contrast, then I'd have more colour here now, but that is a default picture style and I'm not going to change it in my camera, and that's what it's done to it, from the raw to the JPEG. So it's up to you whichever way you want to go about it. It'll work the same. So one of the first things first before I go on to the next stage, and I'm not going to go, I did do this video twice, I'm going to go on that you need to have a calibrated screen. If you haven't got a calibrated screen, then one, your brightness and stuff like that, it's all going to be to cock. You need to have a calibrated screen, and I recommend the Spider 4. The Spider 4 gives you perfect highlights next to shadow detail. So which means that when you sat there trying to get a nice highlight next to shadow on your computer, that you're actually seeing that shadow properly. You're not, if I know when I turn my calibration off that all my pictures look a bit flat. So as I, you know, like that there, that image there is flatter than that one. That one's more punchier with a contrast on it. Now, and that's how mine look to people that are uncalibrated. So you need to be calibrated. If you're not, it ain't going to work right. For one, you need to, for this next bit that we're going to do now, what we're going to do is, and this is why calibrated is important, because the new calibrators as well, they set the brightness on your computer so you know that the brightness is correct. Now the brightness will be, on mine out of the box it's 70%, it's now on 22%. So that's how much it needs to be turned down to be calibrated properly. So if you're up at 70, this next bit, you'll see why in a minute. So what you need to do is you need to go to your JPEG. You need to put your card back into your camera, and you need to play it and look at it on the back of your camera. And your brightness of your camera should match the brightness of your screen. Now on my 60D, the default setting is 4. I think it goes 1 to 7. I had to turn it down to 3. And the brightness on my camera now is near enough the brightness on my computer screen. So that's the first thing to do, to set the brightness. Pretty easy, eh? And I would recommend as well changing your JPEG preview to JPEG to shoot in Adobe RGB 1998. A lot of them give you the choice to choose sRGB or Adobe RGB. Now I'm a RAW shooter, but so it ain't really that much of a problem. But if I do shoot JPEG now, I know that when my computer edits it like it's done here, from the RAW to the JPEG, I know I've got a broader colour space to work with if I want to edit it later, because we all know you can still edit a JPEG quite hard, to be honest. I've edited loads and printed them massive and they look perfectly fine, but anyway, that's another debate. So once you've done that, you've set your brightness up on your camera and you've set your brightness should be already set on your monitor. Now, remember when we said if your monitor ain't calibrated and the brightness of your screen is, say mine was on 70, because mine's a good screen, it's not a crap screen, it's really brilliant screen. So if I left my brightness at 70, I'd be turning my camera's brightness up horrendously, but it won't be right, it won't be as it should be. So that's why it matters. So anyway, without boring you anymore, we've done that. So now you're on your neutral picture style, you've set your brightness of your camera to your screen, so the brightness is good. So what we need, all we really need to do now is we need to make this RAW file here look like that JPEG. And then once we've done that, we can tell Adobe Lightroom that every time we import RAW files from the 60D, that it's going to make them look like that. So basically, if I look at that JPEG now on my camera, I mean, obviously your camera's a much cheaper screen. It looks near as goddamn it. It's near enough there. But if I look at the RAW file and the JPEG preview, it's not there because it's not. It just looks a lot flatter. So this will sort that out. So let's go to work. Now I have wrote the settings down. So it's 20% on the exposure, 25 on the con. Now you've got to mess around yourself. I'm going to pull the highlights down a bit. Shadows of 10, tone curve of minus, and I think that'll do. So now if we go to the JPEG and the RAW, can you see there's the RAW, there's the JPEG. There's a slight difference in shadows on the, in fact I might as well just pull them down then. Let's try that. Yeah, no, you want those shadows up. So there you go. There's a slight little difference. I'll try to put the contrast up a bit more. No. So there's the there. So let's just say there. It's near enough. I'll put some vibrance. I might put the blacks down. Put a bit of vibrance. There you go. The JPEG's slightly brighter. So let me just go to the turncoat and see if I can do the lights. Well, that's not right. We won't do that. Right, I'm going to just reset that. I'm going to leave it there. It's near enough. If you look at the RAW file, now let's just look at the RAW file. That is how it came into Lightroom. Now this is the edit. This is the little bit of work we've just done to it. And now it's made it a little bit more punchier. What I'm going to do and all is I'm just going to turn the sharpening up to maybe 40%. And while I'm here, I'll show you another neat trick. Now this is not really to do with calibration. I'm going to enable the lens correction and select auto. It's important to select auto, and I'll show you in a minute. So now there's the default RAW file, there's the edit. And if you look at the difference, obviously there's a slight difference now because the JPEG has not had the correction on it. So now that RAW file now looks very similar to that JPEG. So now if I turn on my camera and look at my camera's preview now, it's nearly matching that RAW's preview now. It isn't there, but it is there. Definitely a lot better on that RAW preview. Just going to pull that up. There you go. Just putting the shadows up a little bit. There's your RAW now. edited though, it's edited now to the JPEG. There's hardly any difference. Let's reset the RAW and now look at the difference. Reset the RAW, go to the JPEG, and there's a load of difference. Now the RAW file has had the editing done to it. There's a before and after, before and after. And there you go. You can clearly see. So with that being said, now we've got us RAW file looking like the JPEG out of the camera. The RAW file also matches the preview on my camera. One thing to keep in mind, you don't want to go changing your picture styles on your camera. Because if you go get your picture style on your camera and go put it to, I don't know, vibrant, I don't know, I can't even bloody think of one because I just never use them, but I know what they are. Say portrait, and you change it to portrait, then obviously your camera is going to edit that JPEG and make it look a lot different. So this is a neutral picture style, and obviously I got the exposure that I usually like to get. This is not AV. Oh yeah, it's AV where nearly a full stop of exposure compensation on. I always like to get loads of light in those eyes. It looks a bit white, and I would officially edit that down in post-production. I'm not going to do it on this image now because I'm working on it, but I might actually bring the highlights down like that as the edit, but this isn't what we're doing here. All we're doing here is trying to make the RAW file look like the JPEG, so that if you're in front of a client and you put your RAW files on computer, it's near enough matching your preview on your screen. So with that being said, now I did add some sharpness on as well, so that'll overwrite Lightroom, and I enabled auto lens correction. Why did I do that? Because what we're going to do now, we go to develop and we go to set as default settings, and it's saying that it's a 60D, so you can do this for each individual cameras. Now, you know when usually you import a file into Lightroom, it adds 25% on sharpening, and that's all it really does on Lightroom 4. If I now use default settings, what that's just done now, I'll just reset that image, and I haven't done anything to that JPEG ever. And now what that's done now is if I go back to the library and actually delete that from the library, and then we go and import it back in, oops, and we go and import it back in, press the D key or select the dot. Now if you look at the sliders, look at where the sliders are. The sliders on the RAW file, it won't have affected the JPEG, watch. The JPEG's as is. There's the RAW. Now look at the RAW on the JPEG. So what's happened is, you've told Lightroom now that every time it imports a RAW file, it's going to put those little adjustments onto it. And now you'll see that that bloody RAW file there is near as goddamn that JPEG. So now that when you're looking at your JPEG preview on your screen, and then you look at your... Now if I turn my camera on and look at the JPEG, if I look at that one on the back of the screen, the JPEG, and look at the RAW, they match, and I haven't done anything. All I've done is import them into Lightroom, and that'd work now if I went outside now and we went and did another 500 pictures. And not only that, because I turned the sharpening up a bit as well, it's applied a slightly stronger sharpening curve, and it's automatically done the lens correction for me. So I've let my computer do the work, not me. My computer did the work. Look, if you look, it won't have done it on the JPEG, but on the RAW file, look at all the lens corrections that have been done on the RAW files. And it's done all that for me. And as you can see, this is how to calibrate your Lightroom to your camera. Now, you could probably go on forever getting it. I mean, you could really take your time and get that. I mean, there's a slight shift, but there's hardly... If you look behind him, I think the RAW file, it's a slight different colour change behind his head, but it's near as goddamn it. I mean, it's made the RAW file look good now. It doesn't look rubbish. Now, it doesn't look... I mean, I can't reset it now. Because don't forget, when you do your before and after now, your before is actually all these sliders. What I'd have to probably do is if I go like that. But we already know what it looks like. Anyway, let's just reset the exposure. Oops. I'll just go to the turn curve. Right, so now if I press the / key, it's going to give us... That's how the RAW file came out of the camera, and that's now how Lightroom imports it in and fixes it, look, and pumps it up a bit. That's it. That's how you calibrate your workflow. And I recommend turning on that lens correction, but you must select auto. So, because obviously every time your pictures come in, then it'll automatically just auto detect what lens you've got. Now, I use all Canon. I know sometimes auto didn't really work on Tamron and stuff like that, so you have to be careful, so you'll have to double check it. But you can do that with any of the settings. If you were a landscape photographer, you could go to this and overwrite this. You could go here now and say, well, I'll tell you what, let me just shift command out of that. That should be default. There, see how all my slides. You could say, I tell you what, I want a bit of clarity as well, and I want, I don't know, I'll pull the highlights down a little bit more. Right, so I could say there, and I can just go to photo settings, develop, and set as Lightroom settings, set as there. Then I can shift command out. I always recommend you reset the picture that you use, because if you don't, for some reason when you import it back in, it goes a bit funny. So now if we go back to library again and we go to remove it, pretend that this is a completely, these could be any photos, I'm just using these because they're on the desktop. Let's import them back in. Let's press the D key, or got the dollar, and now you can look, that's my new preset. It's still got all the lens correction on because I'm not turning it off, or the detail. But the difference is, if you look, I've got a little bit of clarity, and I can't remember what else I bloody did, but there you go. And that's how to calibrate things up. And even if you don't want to calibrate things up, this is still a useful video for knowing how to, for something that you do constantly, like on an image, a lot, you always add a bit of contrast. So you could maybe put 10 or 15 on contrast, 10% on vibrance. You could do the lens correction for sure. Why not? You could turn your sharpening up a bit more, because you always find out you tend to sharpen a little bit more than Lightroom gives you. So you could always put it up to 40. So every file that ever comes in a raw file from that one camera, I could now go get my 600D out, do this again, and do it again. So when I import from two separate cameras, there might be slight differences. But just remember that picture style. Now remember when I said to you, if you did change your picture style and you like shooting, I don't know, portrait all the time, you could left it in portrait. Then the only difference would have been when we brought it in here, we would have edited slightly harder to make it look like that portrait picture style that you had on the back of your camera. Thanks for watching. Please comment and subscribe.